Hello humans, welcome to the game development operations. And before we begin, well, I already did this in the introduction, but I wanted to say one final thing. I'm going to be assuming that you have a brain, all right? And by that I mean that you know how to operate a computer, okay? That you know how to download files and that you know how to install them. I also assume that you know how to Google things. So if I'm going to tell you that download Photoshop or download Maya or download Perforce or download Unreal Engine, you can do this without me showing it to you, because frankly this is redundant. And I think most people, if you don't know how to do this, you have no hope. Okay, so if you don't know how to install programs, learn that before you learn how to operate your computer before you begin thinking about making something on it. All right. Now, before I start and get into what kinds of software we're going to use, you can probably tell some of the stuff that we'll be using from the from the monitor here. But there's something conceptually more important than the programs that we're going to be using here, because those may get changed in the future. But as an idea in general, things will always be the same, or at least for a very long time, when it comes to digital content creation, because that's what games are. They're digital content. So let me just open an empty window here. Go to Draw.io, right? And this is going to be the platform that we're going to be using. Decide later. So this is going to be our design document, okay? Well, this is where I'm going to be showing you what a design document is, and the whole pipeline thing. But you get the idea, right? This is going to be my drawing board. So what is a game in general, right? Where does a game begin, or, well, should I say where does the game end? So let's take a container cylinder like this and just put it over maybe here, right? So this is going to be, and let's start from here as well. So this is going to be our final game. All right, this is going to be our final product. Now, before this product happens, we need to actually do something. Let me just add a text here. So this is the final product. Yeah, this is a great start. I can't even type right. Product. Sorry, bad day. Right, so let's make this, I don't know, red. This is the final product. Now, before that, what has actually happened? Well, your first order is to actually have a design document. Okay, this is your design document. After that, now this design document is going to involve everything like you really actually think that can happen. All right, you have your basically, this is your game idea. Okay, the game idea goes, well, it should be going this way, so delete that, and let's pump it into here. So this is your game idea, right? And by that I mean that this not only includes what kind of style it's going to be, but also in general, what kind of feel do you want this to have at the end, right? So at the beginning, you just want to understand what kind of, what would you like to play, okay? And not just in terms of, oh, I want to play a first-person shooter, or I want to play a strategy game. No, you want to actually include as much detail as possible in your design document, because this is going to govern your workflow, okay? This is going to govern how much work you're going to be doing until you arrive at this. Bear in mind, this is your release product, okay? This is not your final product. In general, there's very little games that have a final product in first go, right? You're going to be having loads of patches and updates and maybe DLCs or expansions or whatever after this. This is your baseline. This is your milestone, all right? So once you get to here, things become a lot more interesting. But before you get to here, there's a lot of hurdles to overcome, right? So not only this is not only you have a problem when it comes to game ideas in the designer, but you also need a how should I do this? All right, let's just copy paste one. I forgot how to duplicate it, so that's what we're going to be doing. So instead of only having the game idea, you also need to include some idea of the systems, game systems. involved. I apologize for my for the keyboard you can hear, but I did everything in my power to minimize shock damage to the microphone. I got a shock absorber, an arm that holds the microphone, a pop filter. I did all sorts of tests, but this is how it's going to sound. So if you get a problem with that, you might as well piss off. All right, so get back to it. This is your game systems. It goes right into the design document. So this is your game idea, right? How is it going to play? What's it going to be about? What kind of story outline you're going to have. But these are your game systems. Usually this is the work of a game designer, but this is your first specialization, so to speak, your first item that you're going to add to your inventory of skills is being your own game designer. Now, by game systems, I mean all sorts of things, okay? Damage systems. How much damage will each gun have? For example, if you have a first-person shooter, what kind of guns they're going to be? What kind of bullets they're going to be? Is there going to be a crafting system? What kind of crafting system? How many different items you're going to be able to combine in one go? 2, 3, 4, 5 maybe, right? What kind of results are they going to have? What kind of damage would a particular item have? How much damage reduction would an armor have? How much skill, what's the skill ceiling, right? You're going to have, usually game designers have all sorts of formulas when you get these, big charts, and there's, this line here, and they just tell you, right, well, this is how this is going to be. This is the engagement level of our players. But because you're just starting out, you're not going to bother with any of that. And to be fair, this is a very flexible document. You can delete and adjust things, but the sooner you do this, the better, because if you decide to change something once you're at this stage, yeah, it's probably not happening, or you just gimped yourself and deleted a bunch of work, because you got to replace the system. That means the old one has to go. That means a lot of hours basically went into the dark. Okay, so we have this design document which has the game systems, right? How much health, movement speed, jump height, types of obstacles, etc., 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 right? If there's going to be puzzles, what kind of puzzles you're going to have. This is your design document that's going to have everything, right? The first thing basically is how much of an understanding you have and what's your vision for your game, okay? This is not implementation yet. Aside from game systems and the game idea, it's also good at this point, if you're going to have a story, well, just to have an outline of the story, all right? Because obviously stories change. Okay, stories change. Well, this arrow is weird, but it doesn't matter. Storyline script. So this is your just an outline of what the story is going to be. So is this game going to be about an abducted princess that you have to save? Is this game going to be about a revenge story about destruction and how someone who was noble fell down, and got corrupted, or maybe lost everything and turned bitter towards their assailants? So you got a lot of options when it comes to storyline. You also have to consider that storyline is going to be affecting your final product. Okay, so this thing is shared between both of these. The beginning and the end it's with the storyline. So if you have a storyline that is not finished here, right, and you have to modify it midway, you may run into problems later down the line because your design document does not reflect the storyline, and maybe some of the story elements will be governing the game mechanics, which are essentially your game systems. You might even want to have some 2D artists make some concept art. So this is also going to be another thing here, is you're going to have some concept art. Okay, so all of this, well, concept art is not like, it's just for the artist, all right? You may not need this, but it's good to have an idea of what you're going to be making if you have another person that's going to be making it. So if you have something as an idea and you don't have a concept artist, you could probably, get someone to do it for you and tell them exactly what you want. They'll do it. And then if you have someone who actually makes 3D models out of it, he'll basically make the 3D model exactly, he'll extrude it basically, so to speak, out of the concept art. This is especially important for characters. So another thing to consider is who is going to be your character, right? The player character. Player. I'm just going to write player because this includes the amount of players, if this is a multiplayer game, the classes, you know, what kind of style the player is going to have, if they're going to have a personality, right? The storyline feeds into the player. So you have to have a storyline that engages the player, and the player has to be engaged with the game. And in theory, right, this is your theoretical part. So we might as well just make this, I don't know, make this green, right? Because this is all nice and easy, right? You just say what you want and it happens. This is red because it's hard as hell to get it right. So we might as well move this stuff maybe here, because there's a lot more to this than that. Now, after this, which is this is your initial design document, yeah, you're gonna have another problem. You're gonna have to start making the game, right? I mean, this is all how it looks like, but later down the line, you're actually gonna start making the game. So there's two phases of making a game, two major phases, all right? The first phase is, let me just do this, and this is gonna be the blue phase, all right? The blue phase. So this is gonna be your, well, let's just expand this, maybe this big. This is gonna be your asset creation, okay? This is your asset creation. This does not look good at all. Come on, align, boyo. All right, whatever, listen, leave it like that, it doesn't matter. This is gonna be your asset creation, okay? So what you wanna do, oops, forget about this, I don't like this. Just get an asset creation step here, okay? We have an asset creation step, and at first it begins with the 2D art, okay? Now, forget the 2D art, it's 3D art. It's not the best start of a tutorial, I gotta tell you. Right, so what we have here is your 2D art creation process, and this is starting to piss me off. Come on. There we go. There we go. Okay, this is your 3D art. So you're gonna start and make your 3D models, okay? If whatever you've defined here has to be created now. So if you have defined a player, which would be a dog, you got to make a dog. If your player is a ball, you got to make a ball. If your player is a flying balloon, you got to make a flying balloon. If your player is a plane, you got to make a plane. In general, the first step in this is to look at the concept art and try to make it a 3D version of it as close as possible. All right. So this is the 3D art step. However, you're never going to get this right. So the 3D art actually has its own different agendas. So the first thing is you need the model. So your 3D modeling. Okay. This is your first step at making something 3D. You need to model it first. After you model it, however, it's gonna have to be textured. So you need texturing. In general, in between here, there's also UV mapping. So you might even say, okay, well, you need to map this, so let's just delete this and add another one. UV mapping, and then you have texturing. Okay, there we go. So now you got all of this stuff happening, and well, it should be in reverse really, like this, at least this bit. So you got your 3D modeling, then you UV map it, then you texture it. Okay, what comes next? Well, once you have this done, this is actually the later step, right? These two steps are not mandatory at first. These are just for the final product. Once you have this 3D art, you need to have a prototype. Now the prototype is the game, which just has the gameplay, all right? The 3D art, well, there's also animation in here, I forgot. You got 3D and just animation. And these two are needed and essential when it comes to, prototyping, because you can't really prototype without these if you don't have a 3D model, or if you don't have a 3D model that needs animation but doesn't have animation, right? These two can survive for now, but you got animation, and, this animation is actually split in two, so if this was working, it would be fine, but you've got also rigging. So these are two things that are required. Okay, so you need to make the 3D model, it goes into rigging, and then after you rig it, you go into animation, and after you animate it, it goes into your 3D art. But let's just say it's a closed loop. This is one unit, okay? And then you UV map it, texture it, and whatnot, etc. You could do this in reverse order, but you need these two anyway if you're talking about characters. So once you have that, you need a prototype. So let me just make this a little bit bigger. Yeah, like this. So this is your prototype. The prototype includes only basic gameplay. This is also known as a MVP, okay? Also known as a minimum viable product or prototype, whichever way you want to say it. You want this to be as playable as possible. For example, if this is a platformer game with all sorts of crafting systems and, you know, different enemy types and damage systems, this only needs to be you being able to jump on a platform. All right, you only being able to jump on the platform. At this point, you have a minimum viable product in the idea that it is a game. Okay, you can play it, right? You can make a bigger level to it. I mean, as long as you have the ability to jump onto platforms, this is your main gameplay point, right? This is the focus of your game, platforming. The other enemies and the obstacles and all that stuff, this is just an add-on to enhance the platforming experience. However, in general, as long as you can jump and run and fall to your death, right, this is a platformer. So this is your minimal viable product. Now, there's not only the 3D art that goes into games, you need also audio. So after you have your prototype, right, you need to get some audio for your game. Audio, right? So the prototype goes, and then you got your audio, which is going to enhance the game essentially. You know, the gameplay experience, because without audio, games are very, very, very boring. You wouldn't believe it how boring games become if you can't hear a damn thing. And audio is a pretty big part, because this is what makes your game become alive. Okay, this is what makes your game pop out. Not only in terms of soundtrack, but I'm talking about sound effects. Okay, sound effects are very important. Now, after you have the audio, okay, it shouldn't be you know, very, you know, fancy, but it should be serviceable at least. You're gonna have to start programming in the systems. So programming in your logic. So logic's the game's logic should be here. You make different menus. Obviously, there will be logic in here in the prototype, but the point is that here you're already starting to implement things that should, you know, you'd be reading from your design document, like inventory systems, menus and stuff. But, you know, menus usually come at the end. So after you're done with the programming, you should be having a fairly basic game working. Okay. Now after that, you'd probably, you know, UV map it and texture, etc. But in general, this is your okay. How do I get this the whole thing? Been a while since I used this, so let's make this the orange stuff. So it's getting dangerous, right? This is where you'll be thinking that this is a little bit too hard for you. Maybe you bit a little bit more than you could chew. You know, so this right here is not very good for your nervous system, believe me. Especially because if you have to learn all of this stuff from scratch, right? Jesus Christ, how big is that thing? Let me move it even more. Right, and then the last bit before you actually release the game, right, we already understand that this is the final product. Now, the last bit before you release the game is actually iteration. Now, the iteration process differs from game to game. However, it's very important to understand that iterating is the bread and butter of your creation process, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to make another one of these, and we're just going to make them white for now. And this is your iteration process. This is your first iteration, which is also known as, you know, the delete card, because you're going to delete a lot of stuff. First iteration. You probably have had a bunch of iterations before, but on a small scale, and this is an iteration on a large scale. So you're gonna basically maybe revamp almost all of your game. Okay, you're gonna make a new level instead of just having the prototype level, which is gonna be your first level in your game, right? You're gonna be starting actually making the game. You have the basics here. You have the base, a basic inventory system, for example. You have basic jumping system. You got your basic model, basic animation, Nothing fancy, right? Basic audio. So now you're going to start adding some fancy stuff, better audio, better programming, right? I mean, is in terms of better logic, more optimized, but then just don't worry about optimization at first. You're just going to be adding more features, right? So the first iteration is focused on features. Okay, features, systems, everything that enhances your game. After you're done with your first iteration, you'll probably notice that your game will be slowing down. Now, this is depending on your computer, but that's normal. Now, if it's really slowing down, you might have to run an optimization pass. However, in general, this is not needed unless you're like in a very high and you're doing very high-end games and stuff. So we're just not going to bother with that for now. You have your first iteration done, and at the end of the day, you need to actually stitch all this together. So once you have your first iteration, you need to include content, right? So you got your base of stuff. Now you need content, and content is made with assets. Okay, assets. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I apologize for the beeping. That's my watch. So in the future, if you hear a beeping, that's just the watch. So whatever. I forget how to stop it. Used to do it. So you got the assets. Now, asset creation. This is essentially what asset creation is. So this would also go into creating an asset. All of this would go. I don't know how to take this whole thing right here. Make it bigger. Like this, to back, make it, I don't know, light gray, right? And these are your assets, at least the visual assets. Then you got your audio assets, okay? So you need your audio assets. So there's another one here, right here. This is your audio assets. Right? I mean, unless you're a sound engineer or a designer, you probably might need to get some basic default sound effects, and maybe either license some music or get some very obscure and unknown free licensing song or something to help you out. After you have the audio and the assets here, you can also use the asset store. However, be very cautious when you're using the asset store. I'm going to put this in a diamond. All right. This is the asset store. Now, every self-respecting engine has this asset store. However, it's very important that you understand that the asset store is better used. Okay, it's better used for prototyping. Okay, I'm going to make this a green arrow. Where's my prototype? Nah, this is going to be lousy. This is going to be lousy. Okay, maybe we do this, and maybe we just take this like that, and we add another one like this. Yeah. Okay. So we make this arrow. I don't know. Let's just make it, green, very green. So this is where you want to use your asset store in your prototype. Okay, you want to use your assets to prototype your game, not in the final product. Be very cautious when you're adding, and this is definitely not green. This should be a very bright red. Okay, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. However, when you do it, you should generally try to do things that are obscure. Okay, coding systems, pre-done inventory systems, maybe audio setup systems, maybe some post-processing effects, maybe some hookups to the UI. But anything that the player does not see, you can get away with it. But if the player sees it, you should not put it in your game through your asset store, because chances are someone else has already got it, used it, and people have recognized it. And in general, it doesn't send a good message that you're not putting enough work into your game. Now, obviously, this is a lot of work, right? I mean, everything here in itself can be a specialty, and there's more stuff, right? There's texturing is not just texturing, right? You got materials, shaders, programming, all sorts of stuff. This could break down into specializations like this, right? There's a lot of stuff going on. But I'm just outlining the pipeline here. Now, You've got your content, which is going to be added after your first iteration, right? To make your final product. After this, right? Let me just make this here. These are your assets, right? This is the longest and the most painful bit because you end up deleting a bunch of stuff. So I'm gonna make this purple. It's an interesting color. Okay. Now after this, you have your optimization. I'm not sure if that's how it's written. No, it's not. Optimization pass. This is where you optimize your game. Jesus Christ, everything is so weird right now. Stop being so difficult, please. All right. So you got your optimization pass. This is where you optimize everything you've done up to this point, because most likely you've cluttered your system with things without even thinking. Because you shouldn't be really thinking about how to use less resources and less memory. Obviously, work standard is good. Having some programming conventions and stuff following through and not abusing the system is nice, but obviously you will have some bottlenecks depending on your game, and obviously depending what you're shipping, you got to know what hardware you're targeting. Now after you optimize it, you got to have a polishing pass. So this is when you brush up the effects, for example. Also, yeah, I forgot to add effects. Okay, here we go. Jesus Christ, come on. There we go. So effects here. Yeah, you need visual effects. Okay, you can't just have your your game being boring, right? You need visual effects, such as I don't know, leaves falling from trees, gun barrel explosions, right? Depending on your game, obviously, but all of these effects need to follow a particular style. So in general, you should always try to keep your game have the same visual style when it comes to assets. Also, level creation is here. Jesus, I forgot a bunch of stuff. The asset store really threw me off. Level creation. Okay, this is where you generate your levels. Like if you have I don't know, Jesus, come on. If you have a platformer, you want to have maybe 20 levels of platforming. If you have a randomly generated map, maybe you want to have some seeds ready. Okay, some random seeds ready. If you don't understand what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. But if you do, that's the whole point of it. So after you have your optimization pass and polishing pass, that's when you pretty much release. Have your final product. Okay. Now there's some things that I have skipped here because this is frankly turning into. This is the most pleasant work, by the way, to be doing right here. This is the most pleasant bit because everything works. Okay, everything works here. Now all you need to do here is to make it work better, and here you need to make it flashier and look better. Okay, this is the difficult bit, and this is the most annoying bit right here. After you're done with this, right, it gets more and more easy on the workload. So as you can see, this is quite a long process. All right, I mean, you got quite a lot of stuff going on here. You got a design document, you got a story, you got to figure out what your player's gonna be like, what your game systems is like, how is it gonna look like. You need 2D art. 3D art. Also, I forgot to add the 2D art, and there's actually one thing that we completely forgot, and these are the menus. Just copy this, delete this. Right, so these are the menus, or also known as the GUI, the graphical user interface. Now, until this point, you won't need it because you can read stuff from your engine. Okay, when you're doing when you're balancing your game, for example, you can see damage numbers because you're in the engine. You know everything that's happening already. You can recheck it just in the engine. You don't need a UI to tell you how much damage something does. Okay, you just shoot and it does damage as much as you programmed it in. You're the one that made it in, right? So you don't need this. However, the player does need this, and the graphic user interface usually requires some assets, and these are kind of a separate category really. It's called 2D art. So your 2D art includes everything that's going to go into the GUI, or GUI. Everything that involves different fonts. All right, you'd be better off getting the font from somewhere else. I wouldn't recommend making your own fonts. Okay, so here it is, and now that you have the GUI, well, this just keeps getting further away, doesn't it? I mean, the moment you think you get closer to it, there's another thing you got to do, and that is obviously test the hell out of it. Test it. This is actually not very pleasant. But by the time you've done this, you probably would have played your game so many times that you're deriving zero enjoyment out of your game. There's one more thing when it comes to playtesting it. You generally want people that don't know about your game at all, and you want to not be explaining to them what to do, right? If you have to explain to them what to do, that means you have a bad tutorial. If you have a bad tutorial, your player's gonna basically forget about it and stop playing your game. But that's we'll talk about player engagement later. But in general, you have very little time to engage your players. You got 5 to 15 minutes is the time you have to engage your players. So if you have a bad tutorial, if it runs poorly, if there's not enough flashy stuff, if it's not an interesting story, you're gonna screw it up, right? So somewhere in here, you need to have a hook that hooks the player, keeps them interested, right? You can't just give them, right, listen, here's your open world game, right? I'm spawning you right here, go nuts, right? This may have worked for Minecraft, but it was quite interesting because for Minecraft, it was actually a voxel world and you could break everything. People started wondering, geez, wonder how deep I can go. In fact, almost all the people that started playing Minecraft at first drilled down to the center of the earth. They basically started hitting down, like they would basically, in the alpha version, all right? They just basically went into the void because they just wanted to see how deep they could go. So there's always a hook, okay? There's always a hook. It's up to you to obviously figure it out. Ideally, you'd want to have it in the design document so you can work on it better. But this is how the game looks like, the pipeline looks like, the process actually looks like. That's not the pipeline. The pipeline is different. I'm going to be talking about the pipeline later. But in general, this is your process, okay? So that's it for now, guys. I'd like you just to think about this for a second. And before we go any further, please just understand that all of this is a lot of work, okay? Obviously, you can skip some of these depending on the type of game. If you know you're a shit artist, for example, you don't need this, okay? You could just maybe do something with programming. But that's picking your battles, all right? Your first game should be something that works on your strength. So this is only applying, though, for people that have a specialization, that have a background. I'm assuming that you don't have a background, so you'd be better off starting in order, okay? Because then you can probably make something that, that you can envision. Basically, I'm assuming that you suck at everything. You can't program, you can't model, you can't texture. You don't know anything about sound design, which I don't either, by the way. So I buy all my sounds, right? You don't know anything about coding or optimization is. You've been playing a bunch of games and you think you could do this. So before you begin, just understand that this could take up to a month for like the smallest of games. All right. So that's it for me for now, and I'll see you in the next video where we're going to be talking about the pipeline that we're going to be using, and I'm going to be talking about the software, all right? Okay, that's it, guys. Bye-bye.